A few weeks ago, the 1981 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. In citing this organization, the Nobel Committee said, in effect, that it had performed well in spite of substantial difficulties. But there are others who say not so, and they criticize not only the way the UN handles refugees, but the way some of its other agencies also deal with disaster situations. Well, what about the UN? Is that criticism justified? Of course, every tragedy is a different story. The one we decided to focus on was in Uganda and the famine that struck there in the spring of 1980, not long after Idi Amin fled the country, leaving behind chaos in his wake. 4,000 feet high on the Central African Plateau in northern Uganda near the border with Kenya lies the area known as the Karamoja. For the brief part of the year when the rains come, it is green. But during the long dry season, it is a stark land, and it was there that the famine struck. The roughly 250,000 people who live here are called the Karamojong, and today, very few of them die anymore from hunger. Enough food is coming from the rest of the world to keep the people in their villages. The long lines of the famished who have to go to emergency feeding centers have been dramatically reduced.
Our numbers have reduced quite a lot.
How do they look physically compared to when you first came?
Oh, they're much improved, much.
Since much of the food and the trucks used to bring it in were supplied by the United Nations, on the surface, the rescue of the Karamojong would seem to be a UN success story. It is not. Listen, for example, to two of the volunteers who work closely with the UN in Uganda. How would you describe the UN operation in Uganda?
Hopeless. Awful. Awful. The UN have proved time and time again they're just not capable of doing this.
The famine hit the Karamoja in April 1980. Estimates are that within a few months, as many as 30,000 may have died from hunger and disease. No records were kept, but some people say that half the children under 2 years old were swept away. Now, you would expect that one of the first organizations to move fastest in dealing with famine would be UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. Yet when the famine came to the Karamoja, UNICEF did not. Kevin O'Doherty of the Save the Children Fund. We asked him about UNICEF's reaction to the crisis.
They didn't know what was happening. They thought that we were alarmist and exaggerating the situation and alleged that we'd never seen real famine before.
Much of this footage was shot early in the famine by British television and broadcast in Great Britain. One UNICEF official in the Ugandan capital said he would have known about the famine if only he had been able to see British TV. Still another top UNICEF officer reportedly dismissed the problem by saying the Karamojong are naturally thin. But an internal UNICEF report states flat out that based on information available at the time, UNICEF should have foreseen the famine fully 8 months before it acted. The first effort to bring in food failed when neighboring Kenya reneged on its promise to supply grain. And when the first truckloads started to arrive, the few relief workers like Kevin O'Doherty were swamped.
I think it's just the lack of speed, the bureaucracy. Everything's just got fouled up at every possible angle. And yet, the pressure that they just didn't let up, the work had to be done.
The famished Karamojong stormed each truckload of food. Often they had to be driven away by gunshots. Most of the food went to the strongest. The weak usually died.
It took us several attempts to get anyone from UNICEF to travel up and look at Karamoja. And when they did come up, their stay was for 24 hours.
You couldn't get them to come up?
No.
Why?
So the security was too bad.
3 months after the famine hit, UNICEF officials finally moved. They promised to help relief agencies with a network of feeding centers for women and children. But it was months later before much of that UNICEF help arrived.
9 months on.
9 months too late.
9 months too late.
While special feeding for women and children fell under UNICEF's umbrella, the transport of food for all the Karamojong was handled by the UNHCR. That's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. But like all UN organizations in Uganda, the UNHCR was understaffed, underfunded, underprepared, and over-bureaucratized. And it really didn't want to deal with the problem in the Karamoja. You see, no UN organization is solely responsible for helping people starving within the borders of their own country. When we were in Uganda, Melissa Wells was coordinator of the UN's relief effort there.
UNHCR has a mandate for refugees. UNICEF's mandate is the vulnerable groups, mothers and children. What happens to you if you're 12 years old, not near a border, and you need to be fed? Who can guarantee it?
Certainly not the UNHCR. They had to hire the Church of Uganda to run the truck fleet because they couldn't manage it. The maintenance yard in Moroto looks more like a junkyard. When we visited, there were 48 vehicles. Only 18 of them could be put on the road. The rest were waiting for missing parts, and some had been out of commission for months. Michael Wardlow, a missionary with the Church of Uganda, runs the yard.
Was this truck on the road with a tire like that?
Unfortunate it was. It was withdrawn because of spring problem.
It didn't come in to get a new tire?
There's no new tires for it to get.
So you'll fix the spring if you can?
Yeah.
And put it back on the road with a tire like this?
Well, what do we do? Do we keep it off and lose 7 tons a day?
But that's not going to last, Michael.
Well, it won't last. I mean, you look at the other side of this particular vehicle. He has only one wheel.
Why don't you have the spare parts?
Well, the contract that UNHCR took on with Church of Uganda made the UN responsible for the supply of spare parts. And in fact, in the new contract, which I have here, it also says that the UN are responsible, as you can see, for spare parts and materials supplied by UN to maintain and repair the total fleet.
They drew up a contract to supply you with spare parts, and they don't do it.
Well, if you look at us on the ground here, we're basically sacrificing some vehicles to keep others in the road.
You cannibalize them.
We have to.
They just take parts off of one truck, it never gets on the road.
Yeah.
And they take parts off of that truck and put them on to get other trucks moving down the road.
That's a normal thing to do in Africa.
When we were there, Mats Lundgren headed the UNHCR in Uganda. How would you describe that operation up there in Moroto? The shop, the yard where the trucks are repaired, the workshop, the mechanics there. How would you describe that operation there now?
Well, the operation is going in such a way that we can supply the food that we are committed to supply.
We had weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end when the right amount of food didn't come in here.
Because the UN didn't get it in?
Because they didn't get it in here.
Finally, in April of 1981, UNICEF took over the operation in Moroto with plans to revamp the entire facility. That was more than a year after the famine hit the Karamoja. Could this program have been run better?
Everything could be done better, yes.
Of course, anyone trying to operate an aid program or anything in Uganda these days faces huge obstacles. Once one of the most prosperous countries in black Africa, thanks largely to Idi Amin and then his successors, Uganda has disintegrated into a land of economic chaos. People wait in line in Kampala, the capital, for gasoline, not for hours, but for days.
How long have you been waiting to get gas?
3 days.
3 days. No gas for 3 days?
No sooner had we spoken to him than this man was hauled off by the Ugandan secret
I
police.
just came in and got him away.
The so-called security forces are the most feared presence of all, be they Ugandan soldiers or, until recently, occupying troops from neighboring Tanzania. They make use of roadblocks throughout the country to extort everything from cigarettes to watches and wallets from people they halt. Crime and violence are rampant. The UN and its vehicles are often as not the target. Yet the cause of the United Nations foul-up in the Karamoja went far beyond the chaos in Uganda itself. For instance, one reason the operation wasn't better run is that, as with most such relief efforts, they are almost always carried out by a hodgepodge of UN and private agencies. Most are fiercely independent, often competitive, and very jealous of their turf. Supposedly to deal with just this problem, a few years ago, the UN set up yet another organization. Its mission? To coordinate international relief activities. It's called UNDRO, the UN Disaster Relief Coordinator. But a UN report charges UNDRO has failed to take the lead. Even other UN organizations won't follow it. What's more, it's had almost no active role in this disaster in Uganda. In fact, some UN officials here in Kampala tell us that UNDRO in itself is a disaster. In September of 1980, in an effort to bring some order, Melissa Wells was named coordinator of the overall relief program. She did have a title, but not much real authority.
What needs doing, again, as I speak from my personal experience, which has been horrendous here, is that on the spot someone be designated with what one might call emergency powers. Somebody, not from the outside, but somebody who knows the country and the difficulties, and then cut through hiring, cut through procurement, and get on with it. And it doesn't exist at the moment.
Have you ever demanded that authority?
No, I have not. No, I have not.
It wasn't just authority Melissa Wells lacked. Though a career American diplomat, she had no first-hand experience in disaster relief, nor was she given the trained staff or resources she needed. That added up to a series of broken promises.
Morodo, this is Nablatuk.
Case in point, shortwave radios are essential out here for contact among the relief stations and the UN offices in Kampala. Most of the field workers have them now, but during the height of the crisis, they were in one of the most desolate regions in Uganda, and they had no shortwave radios. This despite promises from UN officials early on that radios would be quickly provided.
On and on. There should be someone here who can say, okay, we'll get you a radio and we guarantee it'll be here next week. And you should feel confident that they're going to follow through with it and things are going to happen.
There is an ironic twist to this case of the shortwave radios. It turns out there are enough shortwave radios sitting in a storage room in the headquarters of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Geneva, Switzerland. All they had to do was ship them. Evidently, the people who needed to know of their availability didn't. The next big UN foul-up dealt with seeds. Food could get in, but to end the crisis, the Karamojong needed to become self-sufficient again. That meant in March of 1981, the planting season, the Karamojong would need something to put in the ground. Gilbert Greenall of Oxfam, another British relief group, pushed the UN to get those seeds.
In November, we were reassured that the United Nations Development Programme were going to take personal responsibility for provision of the seed.
And this was Melissa Wells who reassured you?
Melissa who reassured us.
To get those seeds, Melissa Wells contacted the UN's huge Food and Agriculture Organization here in Rome. But again, the UN bureaucracy struck out. The whole process moved so slowly it was obvious that if left to the UN, there would be no seed by planting time. So how did you resolve it in the end? What did you do?
But at this stage in the procurement, we were running so late that we had to go to the European Economic Community, who have a very effective office in Kampala, and they came forward with the money straight away. And
they bought the seed?
They bought the seed.
So what did the UN do?
They let us down.
It's a joke. We got issued with a list when we first came up here, a checklist of things that we had to mark off. Egg turners, plates, knives, forks, spoons, mats, beds, mattresses, lanterns, paraffin, etc., 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 curtains, yeah. And they didn't supply us with anything. Then a month later, we put a shower up here, a tank on the roof, and one of the UN guys on his only visit here came and saw it and said it wasn't good enough. He said, we're going to supply you with a shower. And I said, we don't need a shower. We've got this tank here on the roof. It's fine. No, you're part of the team. You know, you're going to have a shower, the same as everyone else is going to have a shower. We're still waiting. I mean, that was 6 months ago.
What's the reason for all of these problems you get with the United Nations? You've got problems with radios, you've got problems with the seed, you've got problems with the trucks, with the mechanics, with tools. I mean, do they have people who don't have the necessary skills to manage these programs?
No, the problem, I think, is there are two sides to this. The first is very few people in the system seem to be prepared to take responsibility for anything, because they can shelter behind the system. They know here there are 1,000 reasons why nothing can work. The other is commitment. People aren't prepared to get in a Land Rover, drive 300 miles across Karamoja, get dust in the face, sleep in a sleeping bag, eat rotten food. And that's what it means to get things done here.
That's offensive. I think what happened to us there was that you had a situation where everything that could go wrong actually did. The fact that we managed to overcome those obstacles in the difficult environment of not just Karamoja, but Uganda, which you have now visited, is remarkable. but it should never be allowed to happen again.
Since we were in Uganda, the famine is over and the United Nations has reduced its role there. Another crisis passed. But for crises to come, a lot of the problems remain, problems that are embedded in the system, a system created not by the people you met in this story, but by the UN's bureaucracy. At their current session, the UN will be debating proposals to streamline and speed up the kind of relief work we looked at in Uganda. Have they learned from that disastrous experience? The next crisis may give us the answer.